On the night of Saturday, October 15th, 2011, 17-year-old Blake Chappell attended the homecoming dance at East Coweta High School in Georgia with his girlfriend. After the dance, Blake planned to spend the night with a close friend, but after a few hours, he decided to see his girlfriend instead. Blake went to his girlfriend's house and they spent around 30 minutes together before a family member discovered Blake. He left at around 5 a.m. and began walking back to his friend's house, but tragically, he never made it. Family, friends, and police searched tirelessly for over 2 months before Blake's body was discovered on December 19th. He was found face down in a creek wearing little clothing with a gunshot wound to his head. It's been over 13 years since Blake was killed, and the questions remain: who killed Blake Chappell and why? Hey everyone, welcome back to Detective Perspective. My name is Derrick Levasseur. I'm a licensed private investigator and former police detective. Each week I'll be covering an unsolved case in story format. I'll then give you my perspective on the investigation and provide contact information for the individuals or organizations connected to the case so that if you have any tips, you can contact them directly and maybe you can help solve a case. So if you're someone who's interested in true crime, specifically unsolved cases, and you would like to hear my opinion on those investigations, please consider subscribing whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever platform you use. And that's really what we're trying to do here. We're trying to share information. We're trying to get exposure for certain investigations that you may not have heard of or seen in the news. And I want to use this platform to make sure as many people as possible hear about these victims, and maybe in some cases we will get lucky and someone will come forward. In fact, I don't think I'm sharing anything that isn't already publicly out there. On this most recent episode that we did, Shelby Thornburg, there was somebody in the comments who said, listen, I have someone who may fit the description of the person in that video. I had them DM me. I tried to verify as much of their information as I could, and I was able to put that person in contact with Detective Crowder, who's the lead investigator on Shelby's case. I spoke to Detective Crowder, great person, receptive, and he's imploring anybody else who watches or listens to this podcast, if you have information about Shelby's case, you can contact him directly with the number that I gave you, or you can contact Crime Stoppers. He said if you really want to make sure he gets it, though, contact him directly. That's the way to go. But you have to understand, just to be transparent, if you contact him directly, you're not as guaranteed to get the reward money associated with it. And my response to him was simple. Most of the people that tune into my show, they don't care about the money. They just want to do the right thing. So don't let me down. If someone out there has information about any of the cases we've discussed, please let me know or contact the numbers or emails that I gave you, because as you can tell, it can make a difference. Speaking of making a difference, I want to give a quick shout out to Criminal Coffee Company. It's the company I co-own with Stephanie Harlow, my co-host on Crime Weekly. And I don't talk a lot about a criminal coffee on Detective Perspective because we usually get right into it. But I didn't want to leave you guys out of the loop either. So if this isn't something you're interested in, just fast forward through it. But right now, we're offering a limited edition hoodie for Valentine's Day. You can see it. It's up on the screen right now if you're watching on YouTube. But if you're listening, it's a pink hoodie with pink lettering. And instead of the fingerprint coffee bean in the middle for the O, it's a fingerprint coffee bean heart. So it's pretty cool. Hundreds of people have already pre-ordered it. If you're listening to this on the 27th, if you order by today, you will get it by Valentine's Day. If you order it on the 28th or later, it may be after that. But either way, it's a pretty cool hoodie. And if you're watching this on YouTube, then it's already the 28th. But don't worry, you can still order it. And we're going to be delivering them throughout the month of February. So pretty cool hoodie. If you want one, go to criminalcoffeeco.com. All right, so we've got that out of the way. Let's talk about why we're really here. Blake Chappell. This case had me all over the place. 2.5 pages of notes. And I find myself bouncing between different theories. The first time I read it, I said, okay, this is what I think happened. The second time I read it, I was like, maybe that piece doesn't fit in that puzzle. Maybe it was this. And then I read it a third time before coming in today and making sure that I had all the notes I wanted. And now I think everything's on the table, which is probably why we're here after all these years still wondering what happened. 13 years, no answers, and it happened in a community where you would think someone would have heard or saw something that may have contributed to solving this case, but that's unfortunately not the case. So I'm looking forward to going over this case with you, and there are some things that have been put on Reddit. Listen, I'm not blind to it. I have read some of them. I may mention them here and there, but I'm going to try to keep it as fact-based as much as possible. So let's not waste any more time. Let's dive into this week's case. Blake Tyler Chappell was born on February 7th, 1994 to Melissa and Michael. Blake was the type of person who was friends with everyone and had an infectious laugh. He enjoyed things like skateboarding, rap music, and sushi, and he also had an entrepreneurial spirit which he used to resell energy drinks to friends. Over the summer of 2011, Blake and his mother Melissa moved from Jonesboro, Georgia to Noonan, Georgia, both located in the Atlanta metro area. The move came after Blake was involved in an incident earlier that May. Now, let's dive into this incident because it could be a contributing factor to why we're here today, or it may be a nothing burger, but either way, we're going to cover it. So according to the Noonan Times-Herald, on May 28, 2011, a disturbance was reported at the Hunter Ridge Trailer Park in Clayton County. The confrontation involved Blake and the stepfather of his girlfriend at the time. The girlfriend had run away from home, supposedly to be with Blake, but Blake made her call her parents and encouraged her to return home. When her stepfather arrived at the park with at least one other person, they worked on tracking Blake down. A witness later reported seeing a gun in the stepfather's waistband, which he displayed by lifting his shirt while looking for Blake. When the stepfather finally found Blake, things became violent. A supplemental police report said that Blake was hit in the face, thrown to the ground, and then kicked twice in the face. And just for a little bit more backstory, this one's a little mixed because I've seen some reports where the girlfriend ran away and Blake heard that she had run away, so he grabbed his bike and went out looking for her. And however it was, he found her, and he actually made her go back to the trailer park with him. And upon doing so, they called the parents, and then when the parents showed up, that's when all this went down. So I don't know exactly how Blake ended up at the trailer park, whether he was out looking for her and he found her, or some have said maybe her plan was to meet up with Blake and Blake knew it. But that doesn't make a lot of sense to me because think about this. If that was the plan and they were going to run away together, why would Blake have her go back to where she just ran away from? So I think more than likely he was trying to do the right thing, knew that this wasn't going to work out well, maybe knew where she was going because there was some type of communication, convinced her to go back to the trailer park, and unfortunately, the stepfather felt like he was still the root of the problem, that being Blake. And obviously things unfolded the way they did. Now, after that confrontation, Blake and the girlfriend did break up, but the trouble from that day did not go away. 3 days later, on June 1st, an arrest warrant was issued for Blake for custodial interference for the incident that had taken place at the trailer park. He was arrested and spent 16 days in Clayton County Jail while trying to raise money for bail. Now, as far as this custodial interference, I was looking it up because I was trying to find more details about what the argument was for charging Blake. And I'll just read the definition for anybody who's not familiar with it. I'm just pulling this right off Google. Custodial interference is a crime that occurs when someone disregards a court-ordered custody arrangement. It can include taking a child from the custodial parent, keeping a child longer than permitted, or refusing to allow visitation. And some examples are also given right here, one of them being withholding a child from another parent, violating a court order regarding custody, exposing a child to danger, hiding a child, enticing a child away from the other parent. So after reading all of that, I wasn't really still 100% sure of how this would apply to Blake, but my best guess would be the argument that he was actively assisting his ex-girlfriend in staying out of the home when there was a custody order in place. Maybe Blake was aware of that order, and the argument was, hey, he knows what the situation is, yet he's been trying to assist her in running away, even though, from what we've learned, Blake was actually bringing her back home. But nevertheless, I don't know how this would have held up in court, but as we go further, you'll see that day would never come. On June 18th, Blake was released with a signature bond for $2,500, and hearings and court dates continued through the next several months, with the final court date scheduled for October 24th, 2011. But as I just mentioned, tragically, Blake wouldn't make that date. So with all these things going on, you have this stepfather who is very upset with Blake. You have these court dates going on. So Melissa makes this drastic decision to move herself and Blake to Noonan, which was nearly 40 miles away from Jonesboro. And when they got there, Blake made new friends easily and soon began a relationship with a new girlfriend, Ryan Campbell. According to Project Cold Case, the two made plans to attend the homecoming dance on Saturday, October 15, 2011 at East Coweta High School. Blake was excited to attend the dance with his girlfriend and friends, but he had to get the final touches for his outfit, so his mother took him to Kohl's to get a tie. Once inside the store, Blake texted his girlfriend pictures of the options from his new text-only phone. After the choice was made, they went back home, Blake got dressed, and then his mom took him to Ryan's house on Avondale Circle in the Parks of Olmsted subdivision. The couple did take pictures, which were later used when Blake disappeared. Blake was dressed in black pants, a black button-up dress shirt with a white tank and t-shirt underneath, a pinkish colored tie, and black Ralph Lauren shoes. The couple's evening began at 5:30 p.m. with dinner at Tokyo's, a restaurant located just off Noonan Crossing Bypass. After their meal, they headed to the high school for the homecoming dance, which started at 7 p.m., but unfortunately, their night did not end there. We have a lot more to cover. We have not even scratched the surface yet. Let's take a break. We'll be right back. When it comes to grocery shopping and meal planning, I've got this problem. I want to eat healthier, but I don't have the time to research or shop for healthier options, and I definitely don't have the time to cook it, but that all changed thanks to Hungry Root, the easiest way to eat healthy. Hungry Root is like having your own personal shopper and nutritionist all wrapped into one. They take care of the weekly grocery shopping, recommending healthy groceries and meals tailored to your tastes, nutrition preferences, and health goals. They make it easy to eat high-quality, nutritious food and achieve any diet or health goals from anti-inflammatory to gut-friendly, gluten-free to dairy-free, high-protein, and much more. Shopping, planning, and cooking food really can be simple and stress-free. Just tell them about your goals and preferences, and they'll fill your cart with personalized recommendations that get smarter as they learn more about what you liked or what you didn't love. Hungry Root also offers healthy groceries like smoothies, kid snacks, sweets, ready-to-eat meals, salad kits, and even supplements. I was telling you guys about my first box a couple weeks ago. I loved it. It had all the ingredients I needed to make the zesty pulled chicken stuffed peppers. That was awesome. I made it in under 15 minutes, which is the case for most Hungry Root recipes. And then most importantly, dessert, the chickpea cookie dough. Shannon, my editor, was actually down in Rhode Island a couple weeks ago. She edits these and she said, "Hey, is that the stuff you were talking about?" And I said, "Yep." Gave her a spoon. She tried it, and I can tell you, she agrees. Unbelievable. You got to check it out. I really do believe you're going to love Hungry Root as much as I do. So take advantage of this exclusive offer. For a limited time, get 40% off your first box, plus get a free item in every box for life. All you have to do is go to hungryroot.com/detective and use my code DETECTIVE. That's hungryroot.com/detective, code DETECTIve, to get 40% off your first box and a free item of your choice for life. One more time, hungryroot.com/detective, code DETECTIVE. All right, we're back, and before break, we left off with Blake and Ryan being at the homecoming dance, so that goes off, no issues there. Now, Ryan's mom, Shannon, picked up the couple from school and brought them back to their house on Avondale Circle. And according to the Noonan Times-Herald, Shannon recalled that Blake was sweaty from dancing and took off his black button-down dress shirt before the couple settled in to watch a movie. At around 11:30 p.m., Shannon drove Blake to his friend Austin Harmon's house, which was located a little over 3 miles away in the Summer Grove subdivision. Once at Austin's, Blake called his mother and told her how great the night went. He then told her he loved her, ending the call with plans to see her the next day. Around midnight, Blake and Austin left the house and walked to the BP gas station at the entrance of the Summer Grove subdivision. After spending some time there, they returned back to Austin's home, and Blake continued texting with his girlfriend Ryan throughout the night, and at some point between 2 and 3 a.m., he decided to go see her, so Austin gave him a key to the house, and then he went to bed. According to news reports, Blake left Austin's house wearing black pants, a white t-shirt, and one of Austin's jackets. Blake's walk to Ryan's house took roughly 90 minutes, and he arrived around 4:30 a.m., sneaking into her bedroom window. Ryan later told the Noonan Times-Herald that the two hung out in bed, where Blake told her that he loved her and said, quote, "No matter what happened to him, he would always love her." Ryan also noted that by the time Blake arrived at her house, he was no longer wearing Austin's jacket, but his own white Aeropostale jacket. Now, I could really go into the weeds on this whole jacket thing because I went over a couple theories in my head, and I don't want to go too far in the weeds because we just don't know. There's a possibility that Ryan misidentified the jacket. There's also a possibility that Austin assumed incorrectly that Blake was wearing one of his jackets. So I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I did check out the distance. There is a map. You can see it up here. We'll throw it up. And the approximate time and distance it would take, 3 miles, it would be around 50 to 60 minutes. Maybe a little longer. It all depends on the pace you're walking. You know, did you stop for a second to pee in the woods, whatever it might be. It wouldn't be enough time for Blake to go home and get his jacket. So I don't really know what to make of it. If you made me choose, I would say it's probably because either Ryan or Austin are wrong about their memory of what he was wearing. But I wasn't there, so I don't know. Is there something in between those two locations that we're not familiar with, where maybe this particular jacket had been at someone's house and he stopped there on his way over to Ryan's? Also possible, but if that's what happened, that variable, we're unaware of it, so I can't really include it into my equation when it's never been mentioned in any of the reports that I've read. So the jacket thing, I bring it up here because I don't want to leave it out. It's something that was said, so I'm going to include it. But I'm not putting too much weight into it because I just don't know how valid it is. So you have Blake and Ryan in Ryan's bedroom. They're laying in her bed, and their time together is cut short just about 30 minutes later when Ryan's grandmother discovered Blake in the room. Now, Blake attempted to hide under the covers, but obviously that didn't work. Ryan's grandmother told Blake she was going to get Ryan's mother, so Ryan urged Blake to leave, and he immediately climbed back out the same window that he had used to enter, and he took off down the road. So Blake started to walk back to Austin's house in Summer Grove, texting both Ryan and Ryan's mother Shannon along the way. His messages were filled with apologies. Shannon later told the news that she had responded and reassured him, saying everything was okay. At around 5:30 a.m., Blake's string of apology texts to Ryan was interrupted by a new message. He told her that a police officer had stopped him. Blake said the officer asked where he was going and requested to see his ID. A few minutes later, Blake sent Ryan one final text complaining about the cold weather. After that, Blake's messages stopped. According to the Noonan Times-Herald, later that morning, Shannon asked Ryan if she had heard from Blake, but Ryan said she hadn't. When there was still no communication by 9:30 a.m., Shannon told her daughter to call Austin. Austin checked his house but found no sign of Blake or the book bag he had brought with him the night before. And now this book bag kind of falls into the same lane as the Aeropostale jacket. I really can't explain it. And based on the source, we don't know how valid it is. According to Austin, Blake brought a bag over to his house. And if we're to believe Austin's account, Blake left to go see Ryan and left the book bag behind, which would make sense. He was going to come back later. But there's no mention of a book bag with Ryan. Now, is there no mention because publicly we just don't know and officers haven't disclosed that information? Or did Ryan not see a book bag? Or did Blake show up to Ryan's house with a book bag as well as some other items, but those items were disposed of? We'll talk about that in the perspective. Either way, the reason why I didn't put too much weight into the jacket or this book bag is because of what I always tell you guys. There's no credible information to say for certain that the bag was actually at Austin's or that it was actually at Ryan's. I just don't know. It's very possible that these witness accounts could be wrong. And based on the layout of the subdivisions, the distance that it took Blake to get to Ryan's would have been about what it would take. I mean, maybe within 10 minutes. Maybe he could have gotten there faster, but I don't know the route that he went. I don't know how fast he was walking. What I did was punch in Avondale Circle and then the Summer Grove subdivision, and I think it put me in like the center around the pool. I think that Austin's house was probably a little further west if you're looking at the map right now, because if you remember earlier, Ryan's mother, Shannon, said it was a little over 3 miles. And from Avondale Circle to the pool area on this map where GPS kind of pinpointed it, it's under 3 miles. It's like 2.4, 2.3, something around there. So that's 49 minutes walking right there. So if he's further west, you got to add another 10 minutes onto that, maybe 20 minutes. And that's where you get around the, 60 to 70 minutes. I will say 90 minutes is long, especially if he's going on a direct route and he's on a fast pace because he knows he wants to get there. Is it possible that he stopped off somewhere in between? Of course it is. I just don't know the area enough to make that assertion. So I can only tell you what it is, and you can come to your own conclusions. Now, back to Shannon and Ryan. After they talked to Austin, they began searching the area, focusing on the two most likely routes Blake might have taken during the 3-mile walk, and that would have been Lower Fayetteville Parkway and the Summer Grove Parkway. And that's, if you pull up the map, that's the two main roads you can see. That's the most direct route to getting there. They also contacted Blake's mother, Melissa, and when the search turned up nothing, Melissa reported Blake missing to the Noonan Police Department. At first, investigators tried to verify Blake's claim that a police officer had stopped him around 5:30 a.m. However, there was no report documenting this interaction, so the Noonan police also checked with local sheriff's departments, but no one had any record of any officer making contact with Blake. Law enforcement noted that it was highly unlikely an officer had stopped him that morning, as protocol required them to document such an interaction. Well, you happen to have a former law enforcement officer sitting here with you right now. How lucky are you guys? Spoiler alert, yes, that is policy, that is procedure, but here's the shocker. We don't always document it. I am guilty of this 100 times over. Well, why would you do that, Derrick? Because I'm dumb sometimes and I'm complacent and I'm a human being. No, what will happen is in certain circumstances, let's say you see a young kid walking alone in the middle of the night when it's freezing out. You may not see him as a threat to you or the community, but as a concerned citizen and a public service officer, you're going to stop, maybe not even get out of your car, but just roll down your window and say, "Hey, buddy, are you okay?" And if I do that and he says, "Yeah, I'm fine," am I going to call it in and say, "Hey, 37 to 311, I'm out with one at the corner of such and such and such and such," and make this whole documented thing? I should, but I'm probably not. And that is a problem. We should be documenting every stop. We should be making note of who we're speaking with. And that way, if there's a crime the next morning, let's say that a car gets broken into or something, now you have some potential suspects. But like I said, I'm not here to tell you what we're supposed to do. I'm here to give you the perspective of what actually happens. And I can only speak for myself and the people that worked for me, but there were many incidents where if it was just a minor thing, just something where you want to tell them like, "Hey, buddy, you got to do this," or "Hey, watch out for that." Was I calling in and documenting every one of those? No, I was not. But here's the bigger question. Were officers asked if they spoke to anyone, right? Did they say to them, "Hey, listen, we know nothing was documented and maybe you just forgot to do it, but did anyone see this kid that night? Did anyone talk to him? It's okay. There's not going to be a penalty. We just want to try to verify that this kid did in fact interact with one of us on the night he disappeared." And in most cases, I would think that officer would come forward and say, "Yeah, that's on me. I did stop him real quick. He was walking around. It was cold out. He didn't have a jacket on. I just rolled down my window to make sure he was okay. My bad. I should have called it in." Was that asked? I have to imagine that it was, and officers said no, they didn't see him. So for the sake of this conversation, let's just say for this moment that an officer didn't stop Blake that night. Well, why would he say it? I can't tell you 100%. I'm not in Blake's head. As young adults, we all do dumb things, and sometimes we want to look like we're a little bit tougher, a little more badass than we really are. Maybe in that moment, he was trying to make Ryan feel a little bad for him or whatever, that he had to walk home and, now he's getting stopped by the police. I don't know. We all do dumb stuff. I don't know what he was thinking at that time, but that is a possibility we have to explore. But there is one other scenario that could potentially explain why Blake made these comments, but I'm going to save that one for the perspective. Law enforcement also looked for any sighting of Blake in the area, and a few people claimed to have seen Blake around 7:30 a.m. and 8 a.m., but police believe these were false reports. So the search continued for over 2 months with no confirmed sightings of Blake. And I get a lot of people questioning this on the Reddit forums and on different sites regarding Blake. And their question is, well, how do they know that these sightings were wrong? They were false. Unfortunately, I do not have the police reports in front of me. The police officers could be wrong. They might have been confirmed sightings. But I do think based on what we know about the situation, and we know that Blake's text stopped a little after 5:30 a.m. and he wasn't seen or heard from again, more than likely, whatever happened to him happened in that very short period of time. And when we find out what happened to Blake, either it was already done at that point or he was being held somewhere else. He wouldn't be walking around just aimlessly walking the streets unless he was running away from his problems, which I guess we have to consider that as well, although there were no signs of it. He had Ryan, he had his mother, and things really seemed to be going well, so it's not at the top of my list. So I think the fact that he was unresponsive after 5:30 and maybe where the sightings were made, it just didn't align with what they believed happened to Blake. But I understand the speculation and also the criticism. We don't have much detail. All we know is that police essentially discounted these reports. And without having all the details, I think it's perfectly fine for us to question that. Maybe if we had more information after 13 years, we'd be more receptive to the fact that it's false reports. But this goes back to my whole belief that there should be a spectrum. 5 years, you give a little bit more. 10 years, you give a little bit more. 15 years, you release a little bit more. By keeping everything so close to the chest, it makes a lot of people have a lot of questions, and I can't blame them. So time passed on, and Blake's court date came and went, and there was still no sign of Blake. On October 24th, the charges were dropped after the prosecutor spoke to both Blake's ex-girlfriend and her stepfather. The ex said she didn't want the case to continue, and her stepfather was fine with the case being dropped as long as he didn't see Blake again. But here's the thing. No one would see Blake again. Just over 2 months after Blake disappeared on December 19th, 2011, a passerby contacted police after discovering a body in a creek near the Summer Grove Golf and Tennis Club. The body was lying face down in the shallow water, wearing only an undershirt and underwear. No other clothing or belongings such as a phone or wallet were found nearby. Based on 2 lip piercings and a Playboy bunny tattoo on the chest, law enforcement was confident that the body was that of 17-year-old Blake Chappell. And according to reports, Blake had been shot in the head. Now, police initially withheld details about the caliber of the bullet, but they later told the Noonan Times-Herald that it was between a .22 and .45 caliber, not a shotgun, and the wound had been inflicted from close range. Authorities did not provide a time of death or disclose much about the condition of Blake's remains, but the death certificate listed 6 a.m. on Sunday, October 16, 2011 as the official time of death. So there's a lot that we can extract from this bit of information right here. First off, a pathologist has to conduct that autopsy report. And based on the conditions of the body, lividity, rigor mortis, decomposition, any type of insect activity, they can usually determine with a reasonable degree of certainty when the body was placed at that specific area when it was found, how long it was exposed to the elements. So for them to put this date, October 16th, on the report, more than likely they concluded that the body's condition was consistent with being out in the elements in that water for that period of time. If he had been taken somewhere or if he was alive after he disappeared, the body would have looked much different, and I believe the pathologist would have noted that, but that's not the case. It looks to me that the pathologist came to the conclusion that Blake died on the morning he disappeared. And that brings up a whole new set of questions. Who did this? Why did they do it? Why did it take so long to find him? A lot of questions, not a lot of answers. We're going to continue on with the story and get into the perspective right after this break. So I have to tell you about this unsolved true crime podcast called Key to the Case. Each week, the host Sam takes listeners, along with her co-host Sean, deep into baffling unsolved homicides and disappearances. From the disappearance of Lopez Richardson, a man who vanished after warning others he might be in danger only for his vehicle to be discovered abandoned 100 miles away, to the chilling murder of Jamie Santos, whose body was found in her apartment minutes after a mysterious man called 911 to report her death. Key to the Case uncovers stories that have remained out of the spotlight, and if you know what we're trying to do over here at Detective Perspective, then you know this is something that I can definitely get on board with. I really respect the fact that Sam and Sean thoroughly and thoughtfully discuss each case, and I really like what they're doing over there at Key to the Case, and if you're here with me right now, I'm confident that you will too. So find Key to the Case wherever you listen to podcasts. "10 days after Blake's body was found, his family held a funeral to honor his memory. Friends and loved ones gathered to celebrate the life of the outgoing teen, and the service concluded with Blake's favorite song, Carry On My Wayward Son by Kansas. In the days and weeks following the discovery of Blake's body, law enforcement interviewed over 50 people, including many students from East Coweta High School. They also investigated a mysterious phone call that Blake's mom, Melissa, had received in November. Now, during this call, the caller said nothing, but Melissa could hear a television in the background for several minutes before the call was ended. However, despite all of their efforts, the crime scene analysis, the interviews, the investigation into the strange phone call, none of it produced any solid leads, leaving investigators without answers as to who killed Blake Chappell. And a lot of time went by before we even heard about Blake's case again. In fact, it was almost a decade later. In an effort to generate new leads, the Newnan Police Department launched an Unsolved Murders page on their website. The page highlighted Blake's case, urging the public to come forward with tips and reminding them that a reward was available, but still, there was no movement in the investigation. On the 10-year anniversary of Blake's disappearance and murder, local TV station WBIR produced a segment aimed at renewing public interest in the case. The piece featured an interview with Blake's mom, Melissa, and Lieutenant Chris Robinson, who had been the lead detective at the time. Lieutenant Robinson stated that without someone coming forward, solving the case would be nearly impossible, but he was certain that someone out there knows the truth. During the segment, Melissa also made an emotional plea, describing Blake as an innocent boy and expressing her desperate need to understand why he was taken from her. 2 years after launching the Unsolved Murders page, the Newnan Police Department held a press conference, which they shared on their Facebook page. In the video, Detective Marcos Gonzalez reassured viewers that Blake's case remained a priority and announced that the department had assigned an additional detective to the investigation. Gonzalez also revealed new information. The department had received 2 letters regarding the case, one in 2011 and another one a few years later. The letters contained critical details about Blake's murder, but the author had not been in contact for several years. Gonzalez made a direct appeal to the writer, urging them to reach out to law enforcement again and promising that their identity would be protected. The press conference did its job. It reignited hope for answers. Blake's mom, Melissa, expressed her optimism in an interview with the Newnan Times-Herald, saying, quote, "I have faith that this person or persons will finally do the right thing and come forward, so Blake will get the justice he deserves." And I appreciate this. I talked a little while ago about the spectrum as far as releasing more information to the public as the case continues to go nowhere. That can be subjective depending on what department you're talking to. Some believe that a case isn't cold until 20, 30 years later. Some believe that after 5, 10 years, that's when you start disseminating information. Clearly, the Newnan Police Department was more on the liberal side of those things and was okay with releasing things sooner. And I agree with them. I don't think you want to be conservative in this situation where 20 years later, you're still holding on to those critical details, hoping that someone's going to walk through the door. More than likely, that's not going to happen. And even if it does happen, I say this all the time, if they walk through the door 30, 40 years later, did you really get justice? Obviously, the victim's gone, and this person's probably on their deathbed. So what did you really accomplish? Yes, you want answers, but more than likely, the people that were actually affected by it are either dead or soon to be dead. So I don't think that's the way to go. We need to get answers now. People shouldn't have to wait 30 or 40 years to find out what happened to their loved one. Is that the sad reality? Will that be the case sometimes? Of course. But let's not make it because we decided to keep everything in-house and not share information. After 10, 15 years, what do you have to lose? So that first press conference happened, and then 5 months later in March of 2024, the Newnan Police Department issued a press release indicating progress in Blake's case. According to the release, 3 search warrants were served at individual residences in the Sharpsburg area, located just over 10 miles from Newnan. Evidence collected during these searches was sent to the Georgia Bureau of Investigations, also known as the GBI, for further analysis. Now, the press release also touched on the topic of suspects, and previous reports had suggested there were 3 unnamed suspects in the case. And while speculation about their identities had circulated online, specifically on Reddit, police have not officially named them. The release did confirm that some suspects had been ruled out based on new developments. Additionally, it mentioned that one person of interest voluntarily came in for questioning, though no further details were provided. Since that press release, no new information has been shared. The results of the evidence have not been released, and no arrests have been made. Despite all of this, the Newnan Police Department continues to list Blake's case as a top priority. So over 13 years later, Blake's family, friends, and law enforcement officials are still searching for answers and the identity of Blake's killer. All right, let's dive into this perspective. We can elaborate on some of the things I already talked about. We're also going to discuss some other things that I didn't talk about, but I mentioned. And I have to apologize. It's going to be a little scattered. I have notes everywhere, and I kept adding more and more notes as I kept going through the case and rereading it. So it may come off as a little scattered, but I'm going to try to be as concise as I can. So the first thing I want to talk about, or at least mention, this police officer that stopped Blake 30 minutes into the walk. We got to get to the bottom of this. Was there actually a police officer who stopped him? Was it someone who presented themselves as a police officer, and that's how they got close to Blake, gained his trust, and maybe got his guard down? And then the biggest question for me is, did Blake actually send those text messages, or were they sent by someone else? And that's a question that could be answered by understanding Blake's phone. We know he had a text-only phone, but did he have like a passcode set up? If he didn't, then that means anybody could have sent those messages. And without Blake's phone, that could be more difficult to find out. But I would imagine that Ryan or Austin or Melissa would have that information. So that's number one. Was Blake the only one capable of sending a message from that phone? If so, then it makes the idea that he was in fact stopped by someone at least appearing to be a police officer that much more plausible. Now, as far as the identity of that police officer, it could be an actual officer who just doesn't want to come forward because they didn't follow policy and procedure, which, by the way, if that's the case, you're an idiot. You should come forward. We need to know that information, and this is not that serious. Or, like I just mentioned, it's someone who presented themselves as a police officer and maybe got his guard down. But if that's what happened, I don't think Blake would have been sending a message after that said he was cold. But now we go back to what I just said. What if the first message was accurate? Maybe this police officer, I'm doing air quotes for anybody on audio, maybe they approached Blake again, and if they did have the ability to text from his phone, they could have sent that text message to Ryan just to throw her off for a little bit longer. These are all questions that I need to know. I need to know to be able to fill in the rest of the blanks. I also want to talk about the letters and the phone call because there's a real possibility that they go hand in hand. I always go back to the Rex Heuermann case, and I think about the fact that allegedly he killed his victims, but then he would also create victims within these victims' families by calling them and contacting them and basically torturing and harassing them. And by doing so, he had a secondary gratification seeing the trauma that he caused to the family members of his victims. So that could be the case here, where you have the killer calling Melissa to hear her voice and maybe hear the pain in her voice and just to listen for a couple minutes before hanging up. But if we take that phone call aside and we say, okay, maybe it was just a coincidence and just some random prankster, that's also possible. But now you have these letters. Obviously, I haven't read the letters, but we know based on what law enforcement has said, essentially the writer of these letters had guilt knowledge. They knew details about Blake's death that have not been released publicly, which means that they were there when the act was committed, they committed the act themselves, or they have direct communication with the offender in this case. So either way, whatever it is, they're extremely valuable. And I always tell you guys, if more than one person knows, it's no longer a secret. So you could have a really strong witness, or, in my opinion, you may also have the killer. This person could have wrote these letters, reached out to law enforcement kind of like Zodiac style, presented themselves as a witness, but in reality, the reason they have this information is because they're the actual offender. But those are some of the big questions I have, and if I had those answers, it may help narrow down the field of theories, but without that information, I'm going to keep it pretty broad. And before I dive into these scenarios, I just want to qualify by saying any individuals or groups of people that I bring up, I'm in no way, shape, or form suggesting that they're responsible. I'm just presenting different theories, and some of them were the last people to see Blake alive, so it's only natural that we're going to at least explore it, but it's important to note that none of these individuals or none of these groups of people have been publicly identified as suspects, and that's important. So the first scenario I want to talk about, the first theory, would be that Blake was killed by someone he knew, someone that he had pissed off from his past. And the two main groups of people that pop out to me would be his ex-girlfriend and her stepfather. But my problem with that one is, how would they know that Blake was going to be out walking around at 5:30 in the morning? There's no way, unless there's evidence of communication with his ex-girlfriend that night. And I don't think that would be the case, because he was with Ryan and appeared to be happy. So for these people who would be 40 miles away to not only know that Blake was out that night, but that he would be walking out alone at 5:30 in the morning, highly unlikely. So means, motive, opportunity, yeah, they have the motive, but the means and the opportunity, I don't see it. The second group of people I want to talk about is Ryan's family. And this isn't some new idea. Many people have mentioned Ryan's family online as being possibly involved in Blake's murder. And I want to explore some of it because there are some valid points that are brought up. First off, we know that Blake was found with just a t-shirt and underwear on in the creek. And when you think about the scenario leading up to his death, he was discovered in Ryan's bed by Ryan's grandmother. And is it possible that he was in his t-shirt and underwear, and when she came in, he jumped out of the bed and just jumped out the window before grabbing his stuff, and that's why he was found like that? Yeah, I think that's a reasonable scenario. But then it goes deeper than that, because you have this young boy in this girl's bed late at night, unexpectedly, and I'm a father myself. I wouldn't be thrilled if I walked in and found a boy in my daughter's bedroom. I would be very unhappy about that, to be honest. But I don't know Ryan's family. I don't know Shannon, her mother, and I don't know who else they're connected to. Some people have suggested that how quickly they acted on Blake not responding to them and automatically following up to see if he was okay was a little suspicious. Some people have suggested that the quick action of Shannon and Ryan in the morning to go look for Blake or to contact him is suspicious. But I think the fact that he was texting both Shannon and Ryan the night before, apologizing, may have been the reason that they reached back out. This is a 17-year-old boy. He's walking home late at night, and maybe mom just wants to make sure that he got home okay. But let's just go down and explore that road for a second. Let's say Blake jumps out the window. Shannon, Ryan's mother, is pissed off. She calls someone, I don't know if it's Ryan's father or some other relative, and says, this punk kid was just in bed with Ryan. He jumped out the window, and I know he's probably heading back to Avondale Circle because that's where I dropped him off earlier. If someone lives in the area and they know the route, they could have easily caught up to Blake, and this could be an individual that has a temper, has a criminal history. We don't know. And that is why law enforcement has to vet not only Ryan, Shannon, and the grandmother, but they also have to vet any family members who may have had criminal histories, who lived in the area, and would have been able to intersect Blake before he got to Austin's. The second scenario we're going to talk about is the easy one. Blake's walking home. He's got his book bag. He's got a nice jacket on. He's dressed up nicely, but he's alone. He's by himself. It's dark. It's cold. And he crosses an unsavory character or characters who have some malicious intent. They see him alone. They want what he has. They walk up to him. They take his belongings, and maybe that's not enough. So at gunpoint, they force him to go to this wooded area where they shoot him in the back of the head, and they take everything on him, including his clothing. Maybe that's why we haven't found the phone. Maybe that's why we haven't found the backpack. Maybe that's why we haven't found his wallet. This was a robbery gone wrong, and the offenders wanted to make sure that Blake never identified them. And then the final scenario I want to talk about is one that's, in my opinion, also very plausible. It hasn't been ruled out at this point, and that's that this was a premeditated murder and possibly carried out by a serial killer. We don't know. Why is that possible? Well, it's a few reasons. We know that serial killers in the past will be out at late hours of the night. They'll dress as someone in a position of authority to lower the guard of their victims. So although Blake may not have been the specific target that night, this individual could have just been out on the prowl hoping to find someone who fit the mold of what they were looking for. So this person who goes out there with a gun, maybe every single night looking and hoping to find someone, sees Blake walking alone. They could have approached him. He could have sent a text message saying they asked for my ID. A few minutes later, they get the drop on Blake, and as I said earlier, they bring him down to this wooded area. They kill him and take all his belongings, and they may have taken his belongings because it's for a keepsake. Maybe there was some trace evidence they were concerned about. There's a multitude of reasons, but when we think about, again, not to bring it back to him, but Rex Heuermann, a lot of the times these sickos will keep stuff as mementos for their quote-unquote accomplishments, right? Again, air quotes here. So that could be the case as well. And if that's the case, we need to develop a radius of that surrounding community and see if there are any other crimes that fit the same MO as Blake's. Because if you do have some matches, then we have a problem. And if you do have some similar cases, now you can start internally cross-referencing evidence by sharing it with other law enforcement agencies, seeing if there are any patterns that can be identified or any potential suspects that overlap in existing cases. All of this can be daunting, but it has to be done. It's not guaranteed to work, but regardless, it's something that needs to be vetted. But let's say it's not a serial killer and they're a first-time offender. Everything still applies. They could have been looking for a victim of opportunity. Blake presented that situation. They had a gun. They got the drop on Blake. Maybe they convinced him to go down to the woods and said, hey, nothing's going to happen to you. They kill him, strip him down, take all his clothing. And then after the fact, they're watching all of this unfold. They're seeing the pain and suffering that they're causing. And so that's not enough for them. They maybe decide to call Melissa to hear that hurt. And then to taunt law enforcement, they write these letters to give them hope and then disappear again. I'm really hoping they make the mistake and reach out one more time because we do have handwriting experts. Sometimes you can pull DNA from these letters, although I'm sure precautions are being taken. I really think we need to find the author of these letters. Either they're the killer or they know the killer very well enough where the killer shared exactly what they did. So if that person's still out there, whether they're watching or listening to this, as law enforcement said, you can contact them. You can remain anonymous. All they want is to solve this case. So if you're truly not involved, why not come forward? You already reached out 2 different times. Reach out once more. Do the right thing. Get this case over the finish line. But if you're the offender, if you're getting some type of gratification out of this, just know you'll never be able to rest. Yes, it's been a long time. 13 years is way too long for Melissa's family to wait for justice for her son, but the clock doesn't stop. Murder has no statute of limitations, and you'll always spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. And that's the one thing I'm happy about. But let's say this witness doesn't come forward. Does that mean we should stop? Absolutely not. We got to keep pushing forward. There's a lot of people in that community, and we have to hope that the killer slipped up and told the wrong person. So I want to recap this story just in case that person is you. 17-year-old Blake Chappell disappeared after visiting his girlfriend early in the morning on October 16, 2011 in Noonan, Georgia. The two attended the East Coweta High School homecoming dance the evening before, and his last communication was from his text-only phone just after 5:30 a.m. Over 2 months later, Blake's body was discovered face down in a creek near the Summer Grove Golf and Tennis Club. He was wearing only an undershirt and underwear, according to reports, and he had been shot in the head with a .22 to .45 caliber gun at close range. Anyone with information is asked to contact Crime Stoppers of Greater Atlanta at 404-577-TIPS. That's 404-577-8477, or you can contact the Noonan Police Department tip line at 770-254-2350. There is a $20,000 reward available. And as always, my final words go out to Blake's friends and family, specifically his mother, Melissa. You know, whenever I sit behind this mic or look into the camera and I talk to a parent that's lost a child, I always feel like maybe it's not my place because I have absolutely no idea what they're going through. And I hope that I never do. But what I do know is, as a parent, if I were in the situation, I would never rest. I would spend the rest of my life dedicated to finding the people responsible. And that's what I know in my heart that Melissa and all the other parents out there who've lost a child are doing. So all I can do is offer my support and the support of the people who come here and listen and watch these episodes, because I know they truly care. This is a community. We're building it slowly over time, and we're not the only podcast doing, but I want unsolved cases being covered to become the norm. And the way we do it is one case at a time. So I'm really hoping that for Melissa and the rest of the family, they get answers soon. But until that day comes, that's going to do it for me. Everyone stay safe out there, and I'll see you soon.